I never should have gone to Old Alton Bridge that night, but something about the legends kept pulling me in. It was a cold autumn evening in Denton, Texas. The air smelled of damp earth, and a low fog slithered between the trees like a living thing. My friends and I had been drinking at a bonfire party a few miles away, and as the night dragged on, someone brought up the story of Hell's Gate. "You say Goatman 3 times at midnight, and he comes for you," Alex said, his voice dripping with drunken arrogance. "Bullshit," I muttered, but even as I laughed, a deep unease settled in my stomach. And yet, I went. The bridge was exactly as they described: rotting wood, rusted railings, and an unnatural silence that smothered the usual sounds of the night. No crickets, no wind, just the distant sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, at exactly 12:00 a.m., we did it. Goatman, Goatman, Goatman. At first, nothing happened. Then, just as we started to laugh, the air changed. A deep, distant thud echoed from the woods. Another thud, and another, getting closer. The presence in the darkness. "Run," Alex whispered, his voice trembling. But I couldn't move. Something was in the trees, watching. Then, I saw them, glowing red eyes between the twisted branches. Unblinking, burning, and the stench like rotting meat left to fester under the sun. A low, guttural growl filled the air, so deep I felt it vibrate in my chest. My body screamed at me to move, but it was as if I was frozen in place, trapped in a waking nightmare. Then it stepped forward. The Goatman. It was massive, 7 feet tall, its hulking body covered in coarse black fur. Its horns twisted like the roots of a dying tree, and its mouth, jagged with sharp, yellowed teeth, dripped with something too dark to be saliva. It raised one clawed hand, then charged. The escape, or so I thought. We ran. Branches lashed against my face as we tore through the woods, but the thudding footsteps behind us never slowed. Then a scream. I turned, just in time to see Alex rip backward into the trees, vanishing into the shadows. "No!" I howled, but my legs kept moving, driven by pure primal fear. The bridge was ahead. If I could just make it. A hand, massive, clawed, ice-cold, grabbed my shoulder. I fell. Dirt filled my mouth, my lungs screamed for air. I turned, expecting to see death itself towering over me. But there was nothing. Just silence. Alex was gone. And so was the Goatman. The first time I saw the Marfa lights, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I had been driving alone through West Texas, heading toward Marfa just after sunset. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides of the cracked highway, bathed in the last dying light of the day. The radio had given up miles ago, leaving nothing but the soft hum of my truck's engine and the occasional gust of wind rattling against the windows. Then I saw them. At first, they were just distant glows, floating just above the horizon, 3 orbs, pulsating like dying stars. I pulled over, stepping out onto the dusty road. The air was thick, the silence almost unnatural. The stars above were endless, but below them, those lights didn't belong. And then they moved. The unexplainable becomes real. The orbs flickered erratically, twisting and shifting in ways that made no sense. One moment they were hovering motionless, the next they were zigzagging across the desert at impossible speeds. I felt it then, that primal, instinctual wrongness deep in my gut. Something ancient. Something watching. I scrambled back into my truck, heart pounding. As soon as I started the engine, the lights responded. They turned toward me, and they followed. The pursuit. I slammed on the gas. The tires kicked up dust as I sped down the highway, but no matter how fast I went, the lights kept up. They weren't chasing me like headlights in a rearview mirror. No, they were dancing around me, weaving in and out of the road, vanishing one second and reappearing impossibly close the next. Then the truck died. Everything, lights, engine, radio, shut off in an instant. I sat in absolute darkness, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. Then the radio came to life. A voice. Not English. Not Spanish. Something else. Garbled. Whispering. Speaking to me. Then I heard my own voice, distorted, repeated back in a whisper. "Help me, help me, help me." I reached for the door handle, but before I could move, a blinding white light consumed everything. The aftermath. I woke up outside my truck, lying flat on the cold, cracked pavement. My head ached. My clothes were damp with sweat. The truck's engine was running. The headlights were on. The lights were gone. But my watch was missing. And when I looked at the dashboard clock, 3 hours were gone. I don't remember what happened. I don't want to remember what happened. All I know is, I was not alone in that desert. Final words from the narrator, 23 words. People say the Marfa lights are just a natural phenomenon. But I know the truth. I just don't know if I was meant to survive. It started with sounds. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Faint creaks in the floorboards at night, the occasional shuffle in the walls. Old houses make noise, right? But then the footsteps started. Late at night, when the house was dark and still, I would hear slow, deliberate steps coming from below, steady thumps that seemed to crawl beneath the floor. I convinced myself it was just pipes, or maybe a raccoon under the house. I ignored it, until I found the vent. The hidden hatch. It was barely noticeable, a small side vent along the foundation, bent open just wide enough for something, or someone to squeeze through. I went into the basement to check for damage. The air down there was cold, far colder than it should have been. The exposed light bulb above flickered weakly. That's when I saw it, a small wooden hatch beneath a shelf. The latch was snapped clean off, and faint drag marks led away from it, vanishing into the shadows. I knelt down and shone my flashlight inside. At first, there was nothing. Just pipes, wires, and cobwebs. But then, eyes. Wide, glassy eyes glistening in the dark, unblinking, staring straight back at me. I stumbled back, heart racing. The eyes, they moved. A living nightmare. I bolted upstairs and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the crawl space, but no one was there. Instead, they found something far worse. A nest, filthy blankets, empty food containers, and a rusting knife with dried stains. Someone had been living under my house. But here's the thing, they never found him. That night, I locked every door and window in the house, double-checking each latch. But at 3:07 a.m., I woke up. The air felt colder than before. I turned on the bedside lamp, and that's when I saw him, standing at the foot of my bed. He was thin, too thin. His clothes were shredded, his hair tangled and matted with grime. His wide, glassy eyes glistened in the dark. And his smile, that awful crooked smile. "I found a way back inside," he whispered. Then the lamp flickered out. The aftermath. When the police arrived later that night, the man was gone. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. But one thing was different. The crawl space vent was wide open. I haven't slept a full night since. Jenna never liked driving alone at night. But that evening, she had no choice. The highway stretched on for miles, empty and endless. The darkness seemed to press against her windows, swallowing the faint glow of her headlights. Then, her car sputtered. The engine coughed, shuddered, and died right there on the shoulder. No reception. No help. Only silence. That's when she noticed the phone booth. It stood about 50 yards down the road, a rusted shell of glass and metal. The receiver hung limply from the cradle, swaying gently in the wind. She knew better, but desperation overruled instinct. The call. The booth smelled like mold and stale air. The keypad's dim glow flickered faintly as Jenna dialed the only number she knew by heart, her sister's. It rang, once, twice, then someone picked up. "Hello," Jenna whispered. The voice on the other end wasn't her sister. It was wrong. Distorted. Wet. A voice that seemed to crawl through the wires, low and broken. "You shouldn't be out here, alone," it rasped. Jenna froze. "Who is this?" The line crackled, and then she heard something faint in the background, faint footsteps on pavement. She spun around, heart racing. The road behind her was empty, but in the distance, she swore she saw movement, a figure shifting in the darkness. The voice returned. "He's already there, right behind you." The call cut out. The chase. Jenna bolted back to her car, lungs burning as she ran. She reached the door, fumbled with the lock, and then she heard footsteps, fast, closing in. She barely slammed the door before something slammed against the window. A face. But it wasn't a face. The features were twisted, distorted, a grin stretched impossibly wide, teeth too sharp, skin too pale. It stared at her through the glass, breath fogging the window, fingers streaking across the glass, whispering something she couldn't understand. Then her phone buzzed. A new message. "I see you." And just like that, the face was gone. The aftermath. Jenna never found out who or what that thing was. But days later, her phone rang again, and when she answered, the same distorted voice whispered, We're not done yet. Emma never wanted to clean the attic. It was her grandmother's house, old, creaky, and heavy with the scent of mothballs and stale wood. But when her parents asked her to help clear the attic before they sold the place, she had no choice. The attic was suffocatingly still. Dust clung to everything, and the air felt thick, like something was lurking just behind her, watching. That's when she found the mirror. It stood in the far corner, its frame warped and cracked with age. The glass was dull, blackened with grime, yet when Emma wiped it with her sleeve, a face stared back. Not her face, the reflection. At first, Emma told herself it was just her mind playing tricks, the dim light, the shadows. But when she turned to leave, her reflection didn't move. It stayed perfectly still, grinning. "Hello," Emma whispered. The figure's grin widened, jagged teeth gleaming where her lips should have been. Then it raised its hand and knocked on the inside of the glass. The sound rang out, dull and hollow, yet somehow deafening in the silence. Emma stumbled back, her breath shallow. The figure knocked again, harder this time. Cracks splintered across the mirror's surface like spiderwebs, and then the hand reached through. The escape. Emma bolted down the attic steps, slamming the door behind her. But the air in the hallway was colder now, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed from above. Moments later, her phone buzzed. A new photo. It was of her bedroom, taken just seconds ago. In the corner of the photo, the mirror was there, standing against the wall. And in the reflection, the figure was still grinning. The final night. That night, Emma locked her bedroom door, but she knew it wouldn't matter. At 3:07 a.m., her phone buzzed again. Another photo. This time, it was closer. The mirror now faced her bed, and the figure's twisted grin seemed wider than ever. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, were faint, wet footprints, leading directly to her door. Daniel's family never wanted to visit the old family cabin. "It's cursed," his grandmother had warned. "Something waits there, something that shouldn't." But Daniel didn't believe in curses. The cabin was cold when he arrived, and the air inside felt stale, like no one had breathed there for years. Dust coated the walls, and the faint scent of damp would clung to everything. But Daniel didn't notice, not until the knocks began. The first knock. It was nearly midnight when Daniel heard it. 3 sharp knocks at the front door. Knock, knock, knock. He froze, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just silence, until the knock came again. Daniel peered through the window. The night was black, the trees swaying like twisted fingers in the wind. Yet deep in the shadows, something moved. A figure, tall and thin, stood at the edge of the clearing. Its face was pale and grinning. When Daniel turned back to the door, the lock had begun to turn. The intruder. The door never opened, but that didn't mean Daniel was safe. Moments later, a cold breeze crept through the cabin, stronger than any draft should have been. Daniel rushed to the window and froze. A face was staring back at him. It wasn't human, hollow eyes like black pits, a mouth twisted open in a jagged grin. Blood smeared its chin, and its hand, thin and bony, slowly dragged down the glass, leaving a wet, crimson smear. Then, the door creaked open behind him. The final night. Daniel spent the rest of the night locked in his bedroom, gripping the handle with trembling hands. The door rattled softly, something pressing against it from the other side. "Daniel," a voice whispered from the keyhole. "I know you're in there." Hours passed. The voice stopped. The room grew cold. By morning, Daniel's family found him, pale, trembling, and clutching a torn piece of cloth. It was a scrap from the figure's shirt, black, wet, and cold as ice. When they asked him what he saw, all Daniel could say was, "It smiled." Riley never believed in ghost stories. That's why when her friends dared her to sneak into the old apartment building on Crawford Street, the one rumored to be cursed, she laughed. "It's just an empty building," she scoffed. But it wasn't empty. The building's 4th floor was sealed off, old boards nailed across the stairwell. But Riley found another way in. A narrow service elevator. The doors creaked shut behind her, and the old machine groaned upward. But when the doors slid open again, the hallway didn't look right. The hidden room. The wallpaper peeled like dead skin, and the air reeked of mildew. Riley's flashlight flickered as she crept down the corridor. That's when she saw it, the door. It shouldn't have been there. The building's layout didn't match. There was no record of a room at the end of the fourth-floor hallway. But the door was there, bolted shut, rusted and chained. She reached out. The chain fell to the floor with a dull clink. The door creaked open. The room that shouldn't exist. The room was empty, yet it felt full. Dust covered the floor, but faint outlines of furniture lingered. A bed, a chair, a table. As if the objects had vanished, leaving only shadows behind. On the far wall, black words had been smeared, freshly written. You shouldn't have come. The air turned cold. Riley's breath fogged in front of her. From the corner, something shifted. A shape, thin, twisted, and skeletal, rose from the shadows. Its face was stretched too tight across its skull, its grin too wide. And its eyes, one eye glowed dim red. The other was just a black, gaping hole. You found me, it rasped. Riley bolted for the door. But the hallway was gone. The vanishing hallway. The room seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. No walls, no windows, only darkness. Behind her, the figure dragged itself closer, joints popping, bones grinding. Its breath came in ragged wheezes. You stay now, it whispered. Riley stumbled forward, her foot striking something cold, the elevator doors. She slammed the close button just as a twisted arm shot forward, its fingers curling around her ankle. The doors crushed its hand, and the figure let out a sound, not a scream, but a laugh. When Riley looked down, the fingers still clutched her ankle, severed and twitching. When Claire inherited her grandmother's house, she was warned not to touch the mirror in the upstairs hallway. Cover it with a sheet, her aunt had whispered. Don't let it see you. Claire thought it was nonsense, just another silly family superstition. But one night, curiosity got the better of her. She pulled the sheet down. The mirror's glass was foggy, the surface smeared with faint handprints, too high for a child, yet too small for an adult. Claire wiped the glass clean, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. But then she noticed it. In the reflection, something shifted. A shadow, standing just behind her. The whispering figure. Claire spun around, but the hallway was empty. She laughed it off. I'm just tired, she muttered. But as she turned back to the mirror, the shadow had moved closer. It stood at the edge of the frame, thin, featureless, and somehow wrong. And then, it smiled. Not with a mouth, but with its eyes, two black pits that curved upward like twisted crescent moons. I see you, a whisper rasped from nowhere. Claire bolted from the hallway. That night, she slept with the lights on. The warning. The next morning, Claire tried to forget what she'd seen. But when she passed the mirror again, something new was there. Written across the glass, smeared in something dark, were the words, "Stop looking." Panic rose in her chest. She grabbed a blanket and threw it over the mirror. But as she walked away, the whisper returned, closer this time. I'm still here. The broken mirror. That night, Claire refused to sleep. She sat in the living room, clutching her phone. But then, a faint creak echoed from upstairs. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, dragging across the floor. She forced herself to check. As she reached the top of the stairs, she saw it. The blanket had been pulled away from the mirror. And in the reflection, that face, hollow eyes, twisted smile, stared back at her. But this time, it wasn't in the mirror. It was standing right behind her. She spun around, but before she could scream, everything shattered. The glass exploded into jagged shards, and a cold hand clamped over her mouth. The last thing Claire saw was her own reflection, trapped inside the broken mirror, her face twisted in silent terror. Ethan never wanted to move into the old house. It's cheap because it's cursed, the neighbor had warned him. Ethan didn't believe in curses. He believed in bargains. But from the moment he moved in, something felt wrong. At the end of the upstairs hallway was a door, old, rotting, and sealed with rusted nails. That room's off limits, the landlord had said. Don't try to open it. Ethan ignored the warning. One night, curiosity got the better of him, and he twisted the brass key still hanging from the lock. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was cold, unnaturally cold. The air seemed to press down on him, heavy and damp. But what struck him most was the whisper. Faint, delicate. Let me out. The voices. Ethan laughed nervously. Just the wind, he muttered. But that night, the whisper returned. Let me out, please. It was louder now and closer. The next day, Ethan shoved a towel under the door. That should have been the end of it. But the whispers grew stronger. They called his name. Ethan, Ethan, come back. One night, he awoke to find his bedroom window open and the sound of slow, dragging footsteps just outside his door. He bolted from the bed and shoved a chair beneath the handle. "You can't keep me out," the voice whispered. The writing on the walls. The next morning, Ethan decided he'd had enough. He packed a bag and turned to leave, but the whisper returned. "You're too late." When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he noticed something dark, smeared writing stretched across the walls. "IT knows your name." The whispers began to rise, overlapping. Dozens of voices now. "He's ours. Don't let him leave. Ethan, come back." The air seemed to twist, cold fingers brushing the back of his neck. He ran. The final whisper. Ethan made it to the front door, but the handle refused to turn. "Let me out," the voice pleaded from behind him. The sound was closer now, right at his ear. A cold breath touched his neck. "I'm inside now." The door burst open, and Ethan stumbled outside. He never returned to that house. But sometimes late at night, when he's alone in his apartment, the whispers find him. "Ethan, come back."
And if you'd never open a locked door in a haunted house, hit that like button. Let's see how many would stay away.